In 1898, the same year that America got involved in the Spanish-American War, brought on by the false flag of the USS Maine, Morgan Robertson, an author, wrote a book called Futility, also known as The Wreck of the Titan. And it was about a brand new transatlantic liner on her maiden voyage, sailing across to New York, hits an iceberg, sinks with a great loss of life, essentially the Titanic story. Later, during World War I, Mr. Robertson was found dead of an apparent suicide from a narcotic in a hotel room in Atlantic City, New Jersey. As I move further on with this series, whether it's going to be one part or two parts or even three, keep this fact in mind about Robertson. Now, taking you to Belfast, we are all familiar with the famous picture of the two hulls of the Titanic and the Olympic side by side at the Harland and Wolff shipyards. Now, Harland and Wolff offered the two teams incentives as to who would complete their vessel first, Team A, Team B, whatever they were called at that time. And the team that was working on the hull of the Olympic was finishing faster, even though none of the special safety equipment, such as the watertight compartment doors, all of the fire suppression systems, all of that type of equipment hadn't really been completely installed. But they had advertised the Titanic, the great ship, it's going to be ready, it's going to do this and that. And therefore, in order to meet their deadline, which they had backed themselves into a corner on, they basically determined that the vessel that was to originally be the Olympic was then to become the Titanic, and vice versa. How did Harland and Wolff get around the inspectors, the safety commissions, and things like that? Because remember, the Titanic was these three ships. I'm not sure about the Titanic, but I do know that the Olympic and the Titanic were part of the White Star Line. Yes, they were built by the British, but they were American-owned, thus the White Star. So basically, they bought off the inspectors, looked the other way, they laced their pockets with money. And that's how we got the Olympic, which was renamed the Titanic, into the position where she would be ready for the marketing date, and they would advertise all of the special features, which they basically lied about because many of those features weren't working properly in the first place. They needed a captain who'd been with them a long time, who was used to covering up for them, working with the inspectors, and of course that was Captain John Smith. And as we go further, there was another event that was also taking place during this construction period, but it was here in America. America, in the period of 1911 and 1912, was literally tearing itself apart over the implementation of both the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue Service. Instead of America funding, or the American government funding itself through tariffs and import taxes and national sales taxes, the robber barons wanted to get in control of the taxation policies. They also wanted to control the nation's monetary system. And they would establish the Federal Reserve, which was independent from the federal government, as we know today, as we're seeing now with President Trump and his dispute with the Federal Reserve raising rates. It would consist of these bankers, and they would be in control of the monetary policy. All the people, very wealthy, the railroad barons of the 1880s, that whole group in there from Fifth Avenue in New York. Now, the whole thing had was tearing the nation to pieces, and people didn't want to be taxed like that. They didn't want the monetary system to be left in the hands of very few individuals who weren't even part of the government. So this was a great controversy that was occurring in our nation at that time. So there was an organization called the Patriots Committee, and they decided that the only way to end this was to kill the various barons who wanted to set up the Federal Reserve, try to keep it from being funded, try to prevent the senators and congressional members of the House who were in favor of this, basically to start initiating assassinations. Now they heard about the brand new vessel coming from Belfast in Ireland, the English vessel, the Titanic, and all of these famous people that were going to be on there. And they decided that they were going to work up an ability to take a large portion of these individuals and many of these people who were in favor of establishing the Federal Reserve, the Internal Revenue Service, the Guggenheims, the Astors, the whole bit, were all excited about getting on board this ocean liner. So they developed a plan to sabotage the ship. I'll stop here because I'll continue this in the next clip.